All right, we're almost at 500. It's growing. So why don't we get started, Sigal? We'll start by me asking you the most provocative question. Are you ready?
Okay. Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
ready.
All right. So who are you, Sigal Barsade?
Yeah, we're not doing a social identity manipulation here right now, but I am happy to tell the folks online who I am in the context of this conversation. How about
Okay,
that?
go for it.
So I suppose first and foremost, I'm your co-author, and as it relates really to this whole wonderful conference you've been having, we are working together on creating a new and exciting emotional intelligence test that covers perception, understanding, and regulation. More proximally to that, I am a faculty member at the Wharton School. I am in the management department and I study emotions in organizations. So I study emotional intelligence, I study emotional contagion, I study discrete emotions. I'm actually known for a lot of my work in group emotion. And I have now been at Wharton for about 16 years. Prior to that, I was on your home turf at Yale for 10 years on the faculty and that so that's I think who I am in the context of this call.
All right, that's good enough.
Yes.
So, um, if you know me, obviously you know that I'm going to ask you, that simple but maybe complex, profound question, which is, how have you been feeling over the last couple of weeks?
So um I have, it's been really interesting as somebody who actually studies emotional transitions. It's been really interesting to watch my emotions and also I feel like the emotions in some ways of the country. And one of the most interesting pieces of it, and particularly since I study emotional contagion, is at the very beginning, um, uh, there's a lot of fear and anxiety. I think that I have kind of gotten to a place of incredulity, incredulity, frustration, sadness, gratitude, um, and calmness, uh, and it cycles through the day.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's just very. I mean, this is just such an incredibly emotionally challenging time period, and it's an emotionally challenging time period globally. Usually when you have a crisis, it's more located, right? And when you're in the midst of it, you can't even imagine that people elsewhere in the world are living normal lives. But this has hit everybody, and
Mm-hmm.
you layer it with all the societal things, and it's just really been a roller coaster, as I think Mercedes just put in the chat. That was actually the word I was just looking for. And I'm kind of stunned. I'm still sort of stunned by this whole pandemic and everything that's come from it.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good leading question to what are your go-to emotion regulation strategies?
um so I would say that again, having a good knowledge of the research literature and using it, I really try as much as possible to do a priori coping if I can, which means reframing. And but it's funny. I think that probably my two biggest coping, or three biggest coping strategies are, one is, and I don't mean for it to sound trite, but it really is those small moments of gratitude. I use the
Mm-hmm.
word a priori, Mackenzie. The gratitude, and with the gratitude, somebody in the chat had mentioned the hurricane, and that was a big turning point for me because we lost power for a couple of days, And I did not like losing power. I did not like losing power because, I mean, I had talks and things to give. I did not like not having air conditioning. I did not like having, I mean, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but actually that has really stuck with me. And I am so grateful every day. I have power, you know, my family's healthy, you know, like I have access to food. And I know it sounds, but I really mean it. So that's part of it. I just try to stay
Mhm.
grateful for what kind of is happening. The second coping is doing something of meaning. I was really glad you asked me on because I think so many people, we're all struggling, for meaning, and we're struggling for information. I've been, watching lots of vaccine things to try to understand them, and so to the degree to which what you're doing now really is helping people in this time period, and I've been doing it in this context. I've been doing it in corporate situations. So staying busy with my work, which means a lot to me. And then finally, if all else fails, um, you know, uh, well, I'm embarrassed to say, but designated survivor. you know, there are just. I know it's, but kind of West Wing means 24, but basically, just allowing to just watch TV, or to hang out, or to read a great book and just get away from it.
All right, cool. Thank you. So now we're gonna get into uh, the crux of your work, and you said it. The word you used a lot of fancy words during our presentation already. So, like
Oh,
things that
a priori.
I know, like a priori. That's for those of you who are living on my side of the tracks. That's a prevention strategy,
That's
or
it.
antecedent focus if you want to get too fancy, right?
Like we real. Oh, come on! I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, there you go.
Although,
But
wait, I do want to say something about this, which is that the point of this is that if you can, if you can try to emotionally regulate before an event and prepare yourself, it tends to be just a lot more effective than if you're being reactive. Now, sometimes you are just going to have to be reactive, right? But it is, and there was a fascinating study that I just heard, which showed that as it related to COVID, that teams that had a priori, like structures ahead of time, that were kind of stronger culture and more positive cultures, they did much better in this COVID time period. Now, that's no big surprise, but what was really interesting about it is harder to build it in the moment.
mhm.
And so now that doesn't mean you
Once
can't.
everybody's at home and like you haven't had good connections prior, like how do
Yes.
you just start building that from scratch?
So if you can, but later is better than never. And so the best thing we can do to keep people in better shape is to try to build it up now.
Cool. So you bring up a lot of terms here, like we've talked about this obviously in terms of there's organizational culture. Then you
Mm-hmm.
you talk about your work in your primary kind of what you're known for in the research literature and is emotional contagion.
Mm-hmm.
So what is firstly, can you define those two things for us,
Yeah,
and then we'll jump in, then we'll go further.
sure. So emotional contagion is when we catch emotions from other people, which we do continuously. It's a largely subconscious process. Um, it occurs because we have a tendency to behaviorally mimic. And so if I smile, you smile. It's going to happen. Yeah, thank you. And everybody who's watching, trust me, you're going to start smiling. Now, if that's where it ended, that would be a little weird because we'd just be walking around smiling with no reason. But due to a variety of physiological processes, which I won't get into, but could possibly include mirror neurons, we then start feeling the emotion. And in that way, we're catching emotions from one another, dare I say, like a virus, right? Now, the thing about emotional contagion that is very insidious, and which is why I'm delighted that we have 662 people on listening to this, is that because it's largely subconscious, what we found in the research literature is that people generally don't realize it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, That is really important because what that can do is that can lead you to feel things that you would not have felt otherwise, but you don't know that it isn't originating from you, but rather it's originating from the people you're talking to, from your social media, from the newscasters. And when it's negative emotional contagion, it can lead to more misery or whatever emotion it is than needs to be. Now, what I really want to emphasize, though, I'm not saying we don't have a reason to be upset or anxious or miserable. All I'm saying is that if emotional contagion is happening and you're not aware of it, or even sometimes if you're good at it, you still are, it's hard to resist, you're getting more miserable and more anxious than you necessarily felt yourself. And so what I've done right now is I've inoculated you. So if you guys remember this, it will help you. And in fact, I've got a study with Jared Scruggs, my doctoral student, where in the beginning of COVID-19, we had people read an article that I had written in Harvard Business Review about emotional contagion. And then we had a different group read the top and bottom of the article, but we put in the middle is where the contagion is. And we put in things about physical, like wash your hands, things you could do. And then we had a control group. And what we found is that people who learned about the contagion 1 week, 2 weeks, and 1 month later had lower COVID-related anxiety and distress. So this is something that we can, that by listening to this, hopefully you've just been helped with. And I would want to note one other thing that I think is important is that I'm talking about being a recipient right now of contagion, but you can also be an initiator of contagion. Now, an initiator of contagion is something that you can do very purposefully. And it's good that you know about it because then you can do something. And this is also relates to your next question about emotional culture, but one of the things about this is, particularly in times of crisis like this, but always think about what you're putting out in the world. You know, we are walking mood inductors, all right? What are you putting out in the world? What kind of contagion are you causing in others? And that leads us directly to emotional culture. But before I go there, Mark, if you want me to stop talking for a moment, and if you wanted some of the questions.
I love this. I'm learning. It's funny. All we ever talk about is like the 17 years it's taking us to build our test. And so this is a very educational for me, and I love hearing it. I've read all the stuff, but I like hearing it. And I like that you're applying it to the present context, which is that being aware of this phenomenon can actually help you be less affected by, a lot of the negativity that maybe is kind of around you in terms of the anxiety and stress that people are experiencing from this.
Exactly.
Which makes me realize that there are there multiple forms of contagion?
Yes.
Like, is it just positive, negative, or is there more than that?
No, yeah. So definitely. So in the beginning, so I was the one who I did the first study looking at emotional contagion in groups. Elaine Hatfield actually began this field by looking at dyadic contagion, and then and I looked at contagion in groups. And what I did is I looked at positive and negative first, and actually energy. So what the mood meter that you've been talking to people about, or not the mood meter, but maybe it was actually, but the idea that there's energy and that there's valence is the first thing that I did. And one of the things I was really interested in was, would negative contagion be more powerful than positive contagion? And I predicted it would be, because for evolutionary reasons, right, negative is it's going to cause more attention. And contagion is all about attention, actually. It's because, again, it's largely subconscious. Interestingly, that's not what I found. I found that positive contagion and negative contagion were equally contagious. And since then, other scholars have found the same thing. And actually, some have found negative, some have found more positive. Basically, it's more equal. So you can send positivity out there the same way you can send negativity. But the other thing is also that there definitely are discrete emotions. So there's been contagion of loneliness, there's contagion of anxiety, there's contagion of anger. Any discrete emotion that you can have, people can mimic and then feel. So, and the other thing I'd want to tell you about contagion is it's sort of the pipeline for our human interaction in terms of our transfer of emotions. It's the mechanism by which we kind of relate to one another. And one of the things that's really interesting that I'm seeing in the chat is I saw there was a rabbi who said, yes, we're taught to be kind of non-anxious presences, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of teachers. And, for those of you who are teachers, I don't need to tell you, you walk into a classroom and, there is contagion. And also when a group turns, that is a lot about contagion. And so this is something that I think and then of course, as Carla points out, of course leaders, and in fact most of the work that has been done in organizational behavior with contagion has been based on leaders and has shown that actually charismatic leadership operates through the contagion process. So this is
Say
a
more about
building.
that. Say what does that mean exactly?
So when we look at leaders who are perceived as charismatic, what researchers have found is that as part of that charisma, what they're doing is that they're transferring their emotions to their followers, and that contagion then predicts the followers' ratings of their charisma. So it's just an inherent part of our leadership
Is
process.
this why everybody in the Center for Emotional Intelligence is neurotic? They're like
Well,
freaked out
so
about this now.
well, it's really interesting. And again, we haven't quite gotten into it yet, but in terms of emotional culture, that's why I say the role of the leader is so critical, because how the leader walks in the morning, or afternoon or wherever, not only are the people looking to him or her in terms of just trying to read the tea leaves, like, oh, Mark looks stressed today. What is something going on? But they are subconsciously catching, if you have it, they are subconsciously catching your
Mhm.
anxiety. So they're actually being influenced and bombarded on both sides. And actually, I just published an article kind of summarizing the contagion research over the past 25 years with Konstantinos Koudafaris and Juliana Pillemer. And one of the things we lay out a definition of contagion, and one part of that definition is it is a type of social influence strategy. And it really is a way to try to shift things. And for those of you out there who are, again, our teachers, our leaders, and quite frankly, your dinner table,
Yeah, exactly.
particularly in the time of the pandemic, think about you're at dinner and like you've come in cheerful, but there's one of your family members is crabby and you're still trying to be cheerful even without knowing about contagion. And then suddenly at some point everybody at the dinner table is squabbling and upset about it. And one of the things about being a scholar of emotions is that I have 3 kids and they know about this stuff really well. So if it does happen at the dinner table, there can also be some blame going on. Well, you caused emotional contagion. And
How do,
label
Sigal,
it.
how does it work in terms of, you know, listening to the news versus the dinner
Mhm.
table? Is there a difference in like the contagion that comes from social media and listening to the news versus conversations at work? I'm just curious.
Super interesting question. So, what I would say is that there hasn't been a study. Actually, that'd be a great study to do. There hasn't been a study yet that like has directly compared the effect of contagion from the news versus. But what we do know, and we could reason this out, is it's all about how much you're paying attention and taking in. So if you've got the news on 24/7 and the news, I mean, why do we choose something generally to be news is because it's negative or it grabs your attention. Although there are some wonderful CNN good news things and everything, but usually what you're going to see is going to be negative. If you've got that on all the time, I would argue that as an ambient effect continually is going to be stronger than even a strong interaction at the dinner table,
Hmm.
particularly because you're going to do more repair with the people at the dinner table. You have an investment in people at the dinner table. So even if you had it, on the other hand, if you're living with somebody who's chronically anxious and that's something to pay attention to. I also noted there was a question in the chat that I think is really important and I want to point out, which had to do with leaders and contagion. And it said, do we always have to be happy? Like, are we supposed to be leaders up there and just being cheerful? And absolutely not. And this is actually a point that Matt LaPalme made the other day in his talk. And it's something when I teach EI to execs, I always bring up. Being emotionally intelligent does not mean just being happy. It means knowing what the appropriate emotion is at the time to be able to best regulate yourself and regulate others to more effective action. And in fact, it could be incredibly inappropriate. For example, right now to be, yes, now, does that mean that you can't do it with some optimism? And one of the examples I give is, so for example, Arne Sorensen the CEO of Marriott, has a very powerful speech where he is not happy. And he is telling his people about what's going on at the beginning of the crisis, but very powerful, very connecting. Fauci is brilliant at delivering fairly bad news, but leaving you not feeling like it's the end of the world and that there is optimism. So you want to be sophisticated in how you are kind of putting together these messages and being authentic.
Well, it reminds me that, it's like the Aristotle quote. It's about being angry at the right time, at the right place, in the right context, and blah, 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 blah. And so, like,
I love that quote.
What's that?
I love that quote. It's a wonderful quote by Aristotle that, to be angry is something like, to be angry is not easy, but to be angry in the right place, in the right, or angry is easy, but to be angry in the right place, in the right context, with the right amount, that is not easy. And the beauty of that quote is it was from so many years ago, and it still describes what we are today.
Totally. But it reminds me that, it's like as we talk about it in emotional intelligence, there is the experience of anger, and then there's the expression of anger, and you can modify or modulate that expression to have different outcomes.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded, I did this study, as we did a lot of studies about how people feel, and this study we did on high school students. They're tired, they're bored, they're stressed, 75-80% of the time. And I went to the White House to communicate that, and I wanted people to be in the red, right, on the mood meter, but I didn't want them to be like, I hate this guy and he's a jerk. I want them to be like, wow, this is really important. Like, this is something I gotta take action from this. And so that's a nuance, right? And the kind of it's like emotionally intelligent, intentional contagion. Is that even something?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I would say that that's a social influence I was talking about. So one of the beauties about negative emotions is that they call attention to important things. There are sometimes you need somebody to be activated. And by the way, Russell, thank you for the quote. I knew somebody would bring it in. You need to be activated to make sure people are paying attention. But what we do know is that negative emotions, once you've gotten people interested and activated, that's where you want it to end, though, because they are not good for decision making. And in fact, there was a big debate about whether negative or positive emotions are better for decision making. The meta-analyses at this point sort of resoundingly show that positive emotions are better for analytic decision making. So you do math better, you make decisions better. I'm not talking about euphoria, by the way. I'm just talking about mild positive mood, right? So you don't want people to be in that negative state once they have to start being able to take action. You also want people to be able to leave with some optimism, because otherwise they won't continue. And I've got a study with Tori Huang and Vangelis Sutiaris, where we looked at entrepreneurial teams who were in the face of escalating commitment to a negative course of action. So they kept getting like negative feedback. And we looked to see which mattered more, hope or fear, right? Because they were clearly fearful that they would lose all their money, and actually they thought they were losing real money. And they were hopeful that they could turn the situation around and do really well. And so now I'm curious, and I will hopefully involve all your folks in chat. Can you guys put in, so both mattered. Hope mattered. Hope meant they continued. Fear meant they stopped. Can you give me your guess as to which mattered more, hope or fear? So let's just take a quick look at that. We've got a lot of hope, and we've got a little bit of fear. We've got a lot of hope, got a little bit. So from my quick eyeballing of this, I would say the preponderance people are saying hope, but it looks like it's about 80-20. Indeed, that is what we found. Hope trumps fear. And that in terms of continuing on in the face of adversity. And so in this time period particularly, hope matters so much. And there were a bunch of questions in chat about, well, wait a minute, how do I give bad news? Or how do I handle this how do you handle this situation to be able to, and what I would say is, be transparent, in the sense of be authentic, say it as it is, but also do it. And again, if we're talking about students, at an age appropriate level, or children, um, and be able to also leave people, though, with that feeling of hope. And the hope doesn't just have to be unrealistic. The hope can be about the general concept of resilience, and that, we've been in difficult times before, and that people are coming together, and, there are real things happening. And I love the bumper sticker idea, Tracy. There are real things happening, with in the world, that we really do are able to have hope about. And so, and there was one other question in chat that I really wanted to address. It was, what does it mean for kids to live, let's say, in a situation, or to be chronically surrounded by anxiety? And by the way, it's not just kids. And it is hard, because it is reverberating all the time. And that's kind of what they learn as they are doing this. And so, both as a parent and as a leader, and the question, by the way, about the dinner table, well, I'll finish that sentence. Both as a parent and as a leader and just as a citizen, sometimes we do need to regulate. I mean, sometimes and in fact, again, emotional intelligence isn't about letting it all hang out. Emotional intelligence is knowing about when you need to regulate to be effective in your environment. And the regulation helps you too, because one of the things we know about contagion is you can contage yourself. So it's not just that you're contaging other people. When I smile and when I try to do that, I am actually getting facial feedback that contagious myself. If I hit the dinner table question, somebody asked, okay, so if you've got the grumpy person and you've got the happy person, who's going to win? So my high level answer is, it's whoever we're going to pay the most attention to. The problem is, there are a lot of what we call in research moderators, which mean kind of boundary conditions that influence that. One of the biggest boundary conditions is that we all have a dispositional tendency towards susceptibility to emotional contagion. So some of us are more susceptible, others of us are less susceptible. There's actually even a scale for this. The scale is really fun. It's things like, I cry at commercials, which, by the way, I do. If you see pictures of cute puppies and you're not going, aw, like there are all these things about kind of how susceptible you are. So if you're at the dinner table and you happen to be the one who's more susceptible, that's also going to influence you. But from a research perspective, the one study that we really haven't done yet, is we haven't really pit one against the other at the same time. And that has to do with methodological reasons. It's very, very difficult to do. We will be able to, and we'll be able to sooner rather than later.
I'm overwhelmed now by this conversation. All right, I need a little break, because I'm like, I gotta process.
Well, and remember, we still want to talk about emotional culture.
We do, but I want to get to why does this all matter in terms of an organizational's effectiveness or outcomes?
Yes.
So
thank you. Yeah.
So tell me, the larger dependent variable, why would, firstly, can organizations find out what their emotional contagion thing, that there's emotional contagion going on, and be deliberate about it? And then secondly, what does your research show in terms of the positive, negative, in terms of outcomes for the organization?
Yes, and thank you so much for asking me that, Mark, because I got so into the construct, I actually forgot that in the study, as an organizational behavior scholar, it mattered very much to me what the outcome was. It wasn't enough to just show it exists, although that would have been kind of cool. That would have been enough. It would have been cool in its own right. But I wanted to know, okay, does it matter to anything? And in my study, what I found, they were in this particular case, it was a lab experiment. But this has also been done in the field at this point and other places, and the findings are very similar, is that when you have more positive emotional contagion, there was more cooperation, including behaviorally, in terms of how they were allocating a budget in kind of a competitive collective task they were doing. There was less conflict. There was greater perception of performance. Other people since have found very similar results, but it goes even deeper than that. One of the things about emotion, and this remember, emotional contagion is the delivery system, but it's the delivery system of emotions. And so you're asking actually a very profound question, which is how do emotions influence organizational life in general? And what we know, there's been my colleagues and I have coined it an affective revolution in the past 20 years or so in organizational behavior in terms of knowing what does emotion influence. And basically, emotions, I can tell you, they influence everything. They influence absenteeism. They influence turnover. They influence satisfaction. They influence emotional exhaustion. They influence teamwork. They influence organizational citizenship behaviors. They influence pro-social behavior. They influence conflict. They influence performance on every measure you can imagine. They influence interpersonal dynamics. They influence gossip. There is not a phenomenon yet that has not now looked at how emotions influence those outcomes. And often they will influence them as much or not even more than the cognitive things we talk about and the cognitive constructs we talk about. And so if emotional contagion is the delivery system, imagine kind of in your mind's eyes that it is when you're kind of behaving a particular emotional way and then you induce that in other people, you are not just influencing their emotions, you are influencing their attitudes, their cognitions, and their behaviors. And so it influences everything. And that's why you need to be conscious of it. And I know, Mark, in your work, so much of what you talk about is being conscious. And you have this wonderful phrase that I love, which is you have to name it to tame it, I think is your kind of thing. And was that right?
It is. I mean, there's a few people who've used that term, but yes.
Okay. I'll give you credit for it. And so basically, your ability to do that is incredibly important. And so yes. I really appreciate that.
We know emotions matter. That's why we're both here today. Emotional contagion is a delivery system. So this happens, and I remember years ago, I'm going back to my own like school days, is that there was talk about like the most powerful person in the room creates the contagion. Does that like you could have a classroom where like the teacher is a little meek, but there's like a student who's got a big personality, and all of a sudden like that person has kind of won with the contagion. Does that resonate with you?
Yes. And so and actually before I answer that, there were two chats. I just had to say, Larissa, thank you for the compliment of being able to read, and it's because it's so interesting. And shout out to Frank from Wharton. And yes, to your question, power. So there's actually been direct work on this, and it shows it in both directions. It shows it that people who are more powerful are more contagious because people are paying more attention to them. Chris Shee actually has a really interesting study where he found that actually the more powerful person was more contagious. It was in a lab setting, and actually I think it was a teacher-learner environment, but it was in a lab setting. And the idea there is, and I would really suggest to people to think about this as leaders, is that as a leader, you want to dip into the contagion. As a teacher, you want to dip into the contagion of the classroom because then you know what your students are feeling. But you want to dip in just enough so that you can get information from it, but not so much so that you lose yourself in it. And actually, the early studies that Elaine Hatfield did were in therapeutic relationships. That as a therapist, you wanted to be able to reach in enough, but not too much. So we don't quite, and again, Mark, you're getting to this point that we're not, in the research literature, we have some hints of it, but we're not quite to a place where we can definitively say who's going to win,
So relatedly, we, the mood meter, and people on the line do, because everybody has known about our work mostly. We got this yellow, the red, the blue, and the green. It's it's the circumplex that we both know. So, we know you're saying that the positive contagion and negative contagion are equally kind of predictive of different things or matter, can be done. But then, like one of the things that we do in our work in schools is we talk about mood congruent learning. And so like we want, like if you're doing a lesson right now around slavery, or a lesson on the Holocaust, or a lesson on X, Y, or Z, Does it make
So,
sense to you to do that contagion work in the classroom to like create the mood for the history
oh,
lesson?
that is so interesting. Um, you know, so 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 one part of me says absolutely. And when I watch movies, for example, I just watched Selma, and you know what? One of the best ways to create mood contagion is music. And
Hmm.
in fact, if we could all walk around with music behind us, it would be very powerful. Movie makers are really good at this, and so when you're watching that,
You are.
you are in it and you get it. So I love the idea. On the other hand, it's you got to do that really carefully
That's the point. You got
because
to bring them out, right? Because that's what you said earlier. You can't do
yeah,
the lesson on the Holocaust and then say, "Okay, everyone, have a good evening," and then everybody just
yeah,
goes.
no, exactly. And you know, and it depends again on the age of the people you're dealing
Yeah.
with, and you know, I like it is. I think I I love the idea of mood congruent learning. And I think it's so incredibly important because, you know, these things that happen in our world, they're filled with emotion. I
Right.
mean, and sometimes it's negative emotion. And it is disingenuous to kind of separate that and have it, you know, but again, I cannot stress enough that you have to do it well and with care.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, so I would take that into account.
I
Yeah.
think that makes a lot of sense. Everybody's saying this is the best session of the whole conference, and everybody loves you, and they want to take your course. And um,
I knew any talk with you was
now
going to
I'm
be
gonna
fun.
like leave you like, well, what happened to my? What about my session the first day, everybody? I'm like, now I gotta like work on my self esteem after having
Mark,
you.
let's talk about this.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So it's okay. I'm gonna just retire and call it a day. Um, so Sigal, you
and by the
talked
way, for
about.
the audience, I want to tell you that I think Mark is my absolute funny, although I shouldn't say this because now I have colleagues, they'll hear it, but hands down, one of my funniest colleagues. Every conversation I mean, we do really serious research together, but our research team, like, he is just so funny that every time I laugh out loud. So yes.
Now I feel better. Thank you. I was like, wait, this conference is too much about everybody else. I'm going to get lost in this. Um, so, all right, we have only a few minutes left. And, you talked about this affective revolution.
Yes.
And I call it, in my work, the emotion revolution. And I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, same.
So, Sigal, the world's in a weird place right now. Um, you've done tremendous research in the field. And if you had like, I want to ask you two things. One is, what is the one thing, that you want people to know, like what's their nugget from all of your research? What do you want them to take with them?
What I would want them, what I really want people to know is I want people to know that our emotions are part of who we are as humans, and they can be used for success and good and performance. And emotions are not just noise in the way of human life or organizational life, they are data, they are information. Which then you can use effectively. And I would never ask anybody to take away their cognition. That's crazy. But if you're not using emotions, you're playing with one hand tied behind your back. The other thing I would really want people to know, and unfortunately we're not going to get to it, which is fine because we'll just have to do this again. But
Yes.
I've done a lot of work on the culture of companionate love, which is being kind of affectionate, caring, compassion, and tenderness. And it is some of my newer research I'm doing with Mandy O'Neill, and we are finding such powerful results again for performance, in addition to, of course, just all the other wonderful things in the organization about showing caring, compassion, affection, and tenderness to each other. And I would want to just throw that out there. And in this time, and this is such a difficult time, um, keep the hope and be kind to yourselves and to each other, because it will make a difference, again, not only to how you feel, but to how you behave and how our world ultimately runs. So that's what I would like
All
people
right,
to
my
know.
last question is, we want the affective revolution, we want the emotion revolution. What's it going to take?
Um, well, so here I will do a shameless plug, which is, so we have a lot of research that we're doing, and I have a lot of research going. And I have one particular study about emotional culture creation that is a 1 hour intervention. And we are looking, and we found phenomenal results in the lab. It leads to amazing things in teams. And we are looking for a research site, and this is the challenge, that has 50 teams that can be experimental teams, at least 50 teams that can be control teams, and that are sort of, that would be separate from one another, that we could do this 1 hour intervention that we would actually do, to see how this works in an organizational setting in the field. And you on this call right now have probably some of the most motivated people out there on this subject. And so if anybody has that kind of setting, please, I'm very easily found on the web. So just find me. So it's, yes, it's 100 teams total. And school districts could be, but it would have to be like within a school. And we are right on that. And then we have one other study that isn't as hard in terms of its conditions, that is about how we always think about managers managing their employees' emotions, but what we suspect is that employees spend a lot of times managing their managers' emotions. And that's a much easier kind of survey situation, and we are looking for that. So the reason I'm saying this is because let's do the affective revolution together. And research is one of the most critical ways to do this. And so I just appreciate being able to ask you guys out there. And thank you all to everybody. Your chat has been amazing. Just
It
so
really is
interesting
very
and
active.
insightful. Yeah.
So, thank you for plugging that study, because I think it's an important study, and everyone can find Sigal. You can see her name, Sigal Barsade at Wharton. Um,
Yeah.
but so Sigal, what do we need? Like the naysayers, the people who are like, this emotion stuff is BS. Like, what do you tell them? How do you get people on that bus?
I get them on the bus with the science. What I have found is that sometimes my best audiences are people who are like, this is baloney. And then, I haven't done as much of it in this call. Well, actually I have, but like, it's all about the science, because that's our value add. And I show them there's nothing better than proof. And I show them this matters. And that is the best way to get naysayers involved, because very often, nobody's really anti-emotion, so necessarily. So they get it.
Awesome. This was so much fun.
This
I
really
just feel
was.
so grateful.
I would love to do this
I
again.
honestly, I feel like we just started. I want to go on and on and on. And so I will, we're going to do more, but we do have
Yeah,
to
thank
we have to
you.
end with our group fee. So
Oh yeah,
please prepare and give me your best emotional contagious face. Ready?
yeah.
And we're going to start it and you ready. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to do a different one today. You'll be the
Oh.
hope and I'll be the fear.
Oh, wait. All right, let's see.
Confirm to end. I'm going to let people finish it. Well, this is great, Sigal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you again, to all the folks out there, and get me a copy of the chat. I would love, like I said, the comments were fabulous, and I would love to read them.
Really rich. Really, really rich. All right, I'm going to take our pic. Everyone wants to get in the picture.
Actually, I think it's because you don't necessarily know that you're supposed to click on it.
Yes.
For those more Luddites of us.
People want the chat. People want your articles. Now I'm going to become your research assistant from this conference.
Well, Kimberly said she might have a thing. So Kimberly, please email me in case Mark doesn't send me the chat.
All right, everybody. So right now we're jumping in actually with Dacher Keltner.
Which I am going to be watching because Dacher is amazing.
Yes.
So,
And so
and thank you for
I have
doing
to run.
this, Mark. This is
Yeah, thank you.
fabulous.
Really love it.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much. Thanks,
Talk to you
everyone.
later.